the White Tower of the Tower of London. Its construction was completed in the year 1080 and it was constructed for William the Conqueror. And this little series that you're going to be seeing covers prisoners, escapes and executions, and there'll be a couple of parts to it. The first recorded escape from the Tower of London, from this very building here, was Ranulf Flambard, who was the Bishop of Durham, and he escaped in the year 1101. So a little bit about him now, and then you'll after that join me for possibly what is one of the most famous and tragic sets of prisoners within the Tower of London. So a little information on Ranulf Flambard now. This is the nearest you'll get to seeing an image of Ranulf Flambard, Bishop of Durham, from his own time, and this is his seal of Bishop of Durham. Ranulf Flambard, born in circa 1060 and died on the 5th of September 1128, was a medieval Norman Bishop of Durham and an influential government official. Ranulf was the son of a priest of Bayeux of Normandy, and his nickname Flambard means incendiary or torchbearer, and may have referred to his personality. He started his career under King William I of England, best known to history as William the Conqueror, and probably in the compilation of the Domesday Book of 1086, as well as being a keeper of the King's Seal. On the death of William the Conqueror, Ranulf chose to serve the new King of England, William Rufus, and he was called Rufus because of his ruddy complexion. In 1099, Flambard secured his most significant promotion to that date, the See of Durham. Durham was a unique fish in England. Being a county palatinate, Flambard was enthroned as a prince bishop rather than the usual bishop of a regular diocese. Flambard had been in Durham for less than a year when William II died in 1100, most likely murdered riding in the New Forest. After mourning the king at Winchester, his well ran dry on the accession of Rufus's younger brother, King Henry I. Well aware of the bishop's sinful reputation, the new king stripped Flambard of his offices of state and imprisoned him on charges of embezzlement. With this, he became the Tower's first prisoner. Unsurprisingly, the crafty bishop and politician lost little of his charisma and quietly bided his time as he sought liberation. Famed as an entertainer, he frequently hosted banquets for his jailers, slowly earning their trust. After organising one such supper on the 2nd of February 1101, for which he ensured extra quantities of wine or alternative liquids of additional alcoholic volume, he waited for his captors to become very inebriated and passing out, before putting his plan into action. Using a rope smuggled into his cell, either in a gallon of wine or a barrel of oysters, he attempted to abseil down the tower walls, despite injuring himself after jumping the remaining 20 feet because the rope was too short. He limped to the outer wall and scaled it to where his allies left him a horse. On making it downriver, he took a ship to Normandy and sanctuary. He took refuge across the English Channel with King Henry's brother, Robert Curthose, where he became one of the Duke's principal advisors. As Robert's advisor, Ranulf pressed the Duke to dispute Henry's claim to the crown of England. Robert Curthose invaded England in July 1101, along with Ranulf, but Robert agreed to the Treaty of Alton on the 2nd of August 1101 to renounce his claim to the English throne. Ranulf was pardoned in a treaty and restored to his bishopric, but he chose to stay with Robert Curthose for 5 more years. After Robert's defeat by Henry at Tinchebray in 1106, the bishop was among the first to make his peace with King Henry and returned to his see at Durham. Ranulf died on the 5th of September 1128 at about the age of 68, which was a pretty good age for a Norman in those days, and he was buried in the chapter house at Durham. When his tomb was opened in 1874, his skeleton still extant, and upon receiving examination of it, it revealed that he would have been around 5'9" tall. He was fond of clothes and was always richly dressed. While he was efficient at collecting royal revenues, he was generous to his own men and later in life gave liberally to the poor. His crozier and signet ring were found in his grave, and they were rather plain. An oddity of his grave was that he was buried on top of a layer of charcoal that was laid over alternating layers of lime and dirt. This suggests that the bishop's corpse may have started to decompose before it was buried, and the charcoal and lime was put in the grave to counteract this unpleasantness. And that is the story of the fat bishop Ranulf, who escaped from the Tower of London. He was its first prisoner and its first escapee. Now you'll join me back at the White Tower as we go into the cases of other prisoners who, sadly for them, did not escape the tower's walls. So join me back at the White Tower as we head off inside to discuss more prisoners. Hope you all found that interesting, the escape of the very overweight Bishop of Durham. Desperate times, desperate measures and all that jazz. And the White Tower, and for the discovery of bones which relate to probably what is two of the most tragic prisoners within the Tower of London. So you're going to join me just there to discuss our next two prisoners, and information is all included for us, luckily, on this one. We are here, about halfway up the stairs of the White Tower. The princes in the tower. The skeletons of two children were discovered near this spot in 1674. They were believed to be the missing sons of King Edward IV. After Edward died in 1483, his two sons were brought to the tower. The older prince was going to be crowned king, but his uncle, Richard III, took over and was crowned king instead. As Richard III, the princes were never seen again. The bones of the princes in the tower were removed to Westminster Abbey and buried in Innocents' Corner, and they were discovered, bones, under this stair. And where they were imprisoned was the Bloody Tower, just over there. And this is the Bloody Tower. Of course, I wouldn't leave off without bringing you here to show you the very place where the princes in the tower were said to have been murdered. So, Walter Raleigh was also held prisoner here too in later times. That's the portcullis. Take you up It's a very narrow staircase. To the very rooms where they were held prisoner.
On the 6th of July, Richard III is crowned king instead of his nephew. 1483. The Royal House of York. Richard, the king's brother, King Edward IV, and Queen Elizabeth. Their 12-year-old son, Prince Edward, 9-year-old Prince Richard, and their 5 sisters. On the 9th of April, King Edward dies. His eldest son, Prince Edward, travels to London to be crowned king. On the way, his uncle Richard takes control of the young king and takes him to the Tower. His mother and younger brother go to Westminster Abbey for safety. In May, Edward's younger brother Richard joins him at the Tower. They are seen playing in the garden. On the 6th of July, Richard III is crowned king instead of his nephew. 2 princes are never seen alive again. There is no evidence that the princes were murdered. King Richard III is challenged and is killed at the Battle of Otway. The winner becomes the first Tudor king, Henry VII. The new king marries Elizabeth, the sister of the missing princes. The rumours now become fact. Writers say Richard III definitely murdered them.
Bloody thou art, bloody be thy head.
This tower is renamed the Bloody Tower. In 1674, workers discover 2 skeletons by the White Tower. The king believes these are the princes and buries them at Westminster Abbey. In 1933, medical experts examined the skeletons and found they are the bones of 2 children. But there is no conclusive evidence these are the princes. We may never know what happened to them.
And this is the very room in which they're said to have been murdered.
1883. The Royal House of York. Richard, the king's brother.
And the bones discovered over there, as we discussed. Here is entrance corner. First and foremost, in here, we've nearly all heard of the Princess of the Tower, or Princess in the Tower, who should have been King Edward. It was Prince Edward and Prince Richard Plantagenet, and they're said to have been murdered by their uncle, King Richard III. Their bones were discovered underneath a staircase in the Tower of London in the reign of King Charles II, and that King Charles II had those bones moved here in a lavish ceremony, and this is what we're looking at. In the Latin it kind of translates as they were most villainously murdered by their uncle Richard. But many now doubt that theory and don't think that Richard had them murdered. Many think that it was the lady we've just seen in the other video, Margaret Beaufort, my lady the King's mother. Because Richard, if he had them murdered, his reputation, he knew it would be destroyed, which it was. Even then they didn't like child murderers. But yeah, a lot of people say that Margaret Beaufort had them murdered to pave the way for Henry VII, which it kind of did, because her husband, Lord Hastings, he had access to the tower at the time. That's the Princess in the Tower. Now you'll join me back over at the White Tower as we carry on with our Prisoners and Executioners series. Back at the White Tower, and you'll join me inside for an interesting little exhibit from a slightly later period than the Princes in the Tower. So join me inside the White Tower. We are in the bowels of the White Tower. The White Tower is a prison. This imposing castle occasionally housed prisoners for at least 400 years. In 1101, first known prisoner Ranulf Flambard, Bishop of Durham, also became its first escapee. Other significant people here included the Welsh Prince Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, King John II of France, King James I of Scotland, and Charles, Duke of Orleans. The White Tower's role as a prison declined during the 16th century, although prisoners were still held in other tower buildings. However, the basement was still used as a place of torture for male and female prisoners, including Protestant heretic Anne Askew in 1546. In 1597, Jesuit priest John Gerard wrote, "The chamber was underground, dark and particularly near the entrance. It was a vast place, and every instrument of torture was there." And that is the room that we are in. As I lead us over to our next exhibit. Portrait of the Earl of Essex, 1597. This is a copy of the portrait painted by Marcus Gerards at the height of Essex' career. However, following a disastrous military expedition to Ireland in 1599, Essex was arrested. Shortly after his release, he gathered men and weapons and attempted to force an audience with the Queen. After a brief skirmish, he surrendered. Execution at the Tower. Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. Essex was the last person beheaded inside the Tower walls. In 1601, the former soldier, a favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, was found guilty of treason. A scaffold was built on the parade ground just outside this building. Records suggest that for his beheading, he lay face down with his head on a short block, and it took 3 blows of the axe to remove his head. Executioner's axe, 16th century. Essex was beheaded using an axe. The customary, if not always reliable method used in England. The precise form of the axe used to execute him was not known, although contemporary descriptions and illustrations suggest a broad blade or a short handle, like a butcher's or surgeon's tool. Executioner's block, 1747. It was useful for execution blocks to be a single use, after which they were burnt. This elm block is thought to have been prepared for the execution of Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat, on Tower Hill in 1747. 2 deep cuts can be seen on the top of the block. And this macabre little item is an executioner's sword. Queen Anne Boleyn was executed with an executioner's sword rather than an axe. It was thought to have been a mercy given to her by Henry VIII, bless his kindly heart. German executioner's sword, 1674. This 17th century sword is engraved with gruesome scenes of torture. Execution by sword was the normal method in mainland Europe and was considered more effective and therefore more merciful than the axe. When Anne Boleyn requested this method for her execution at the Tower of London in 1536, a skilled executioner was sent from France. And for our next exhibit, which is much later on than this era, you'll join me back upstairs within the White Tower. So I've got to go outside and walk all the way back round and up again, because I wanted to do this in a particular chronological order. This, interestingly enough, is the White Tower as well. At just 12 metres in depth, this well provided fresh water for the people who lived here in around 1100. When the White Tower was first built, it was no longer used, and it was drained in 2005 and found to contain cannonballs as well as a pair of old boots. Now you'll join me back upstairs for our much later execution story. And last, but by no means least, we head to the Second World War and a German spy executed, the last man to be executed at the Tower of London. German spy Josef Jakobs parachuted into England on the night of the 31st of January 1941. He was injured on landing and captured and brought to London for court-martial in August. Evidence used against him included a parachute, a portable radio transmitter and a torn-up code wheel. Found guilty, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Jakobs arrived at the Tower from Brixton Prison on the evening of the 14th of August. These orders were preserved by Regimental Sergeant Major Wilfred. The Scots Guard on garrison duty at the Tower at the time, Nunc Wilfred, joined the Scots Guards in 1920 and became the Sergeant Instructor of Musketry. He served with the 4th Battalion from 1941 to 43, moving to the Training Battalion. In 1945 he was awarded the MBE in the New Year's Honours List and retired from the army. He died in 1961. This is Joseph Jakobs, and I'll show you those orders now. And I'll even be able to show you the very chair in which he was executed. The Windsor-back chair. Jakobs was executed early on the 15th of August 1941 in the Tower's small rifle range. This was formerly between the Martin and Constable Towers. Due to the low height of the range's bullet catcher, Jakobs had to be seated, hence the damage to the chair's back. Jakobs was the Tower's final state prisoner and the last person executed here. It's a very dark item, isn't it? And this is Joseph Jakobs in circa 1941, and you're looking at the face of the very last man to be executed within the walls of the Tower of London. And here you see the miniature rifle range abutted up against the wall of the tower, which is no longer present nowadays. And here's the interior of the miniature rifle range, and where the arrow points is the spot where Joseph Jakobs was sat in that Windsor chair and executed. And after his execution and the post-mortem of his body was taken to St Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Kensal Green and buried in common grave 1734G. marked with the arrow. And that concludes this little episode of prisoners, escapees and executions within the Tower of London. Join me for the next video along the same genre over at the Salt Tower. I hope you're all going to find that interesting, and I hope you found this one interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.